Welcome to MIDI's Innovation Vault podcast. In this episode, Greg Montalbano, COO of MIDI Medical Product Development, sits down with JD Friedland, General Manager of Cleveland Clinic Ventures, to explore the driving forces behind innovation at Cleveland Clinic. JD shares his unique career journey from investment banking to private equity, ultimately leading him to a pivotal role in healthcare innovation. He provides an insider's perspective on Cleveland Clinic Ventures' approach to identifying transformative opportunities in digital health, medical devices, and life sciences. JD also reveals how they carefully balance the pursuit of financial growth with a commitment to advancing patient care, offering a fascinating look into the future of healthcare. Please listen to and enjoy this in-depth episode on how Cleveland Clinic Ventures is paving the way for the future of healthcare innovation.
Welcome to the MIDI Innovation Vault podcast. My name is Gregory Montalbano, and I'm your host as well as the principal of MIDI Medical Product Development. On today's show, we have JD Friedland, who is the general manager of Cleveland Clinic Ventures and Innovation. Welcome, JD.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, JD, thank you very much for being with us today. I'm excited to talk with you.
Likewise, I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So we originally connected through an LSI summit, and for the audience, LSI stands for Life Science Intelligence, and they host a summit every year where executives from emerging companies, venture capital, private equity firms, and global strategics come together to help shape the future of healthcare. So today we'll be exploring the unique offerings, the value propositions, and the supporting ecosystem of the Cleveland Clinic Innovation and Ventures, focusing on their MedTech selection process, innovation strategies, and investment approach. We'll also discuss the value proposition of being an innovator funded and supported by a hospital system. And JD, my goal here today is to discuss and understand the inner workings of Cleveland Clinic Innovation and Ventures so that the MedTech innovators and entrepreneurs listening can gain insight from your knowledge and your experience, not only as an executive at Cleveland Clinic, but also from your past roles in MedTech and finance. So first, I want to say, JD, I appreciate your background, which spans decades of experience as an investor, board member, M&A advisor, corporate business development executive across different healthcare verticals. So starting with that, could you please share with the listeners your background as well as your passion for MedTech leading up to your current role at the Cleveland Clinic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent the first part of my career, as you mentioned, as an M&A advisor and an investment banker, two companies in healthcare. Typically, my clients were venture stage companies who were seeking to raise another round of capital or had gotten the company to the point where they were seeking a potential exit. And so my role as an advisor was typically to help guide the board and the management team on whether they should raise money, whether they should, now was the right time for them to exit. And then if they did select to go down the pathway of selling the company, my team would run a process to identify potential transaction partners and negotiate the best terms possible for those companies. I did most of my work in the medical device spectrum, but I also spent some time in both digital health and diagnostics and biopharma as well. After what many might consider a long career in investment banking, I went to work for a Fortune 500 company, Henry Schein, in a corporate business development role. Led business development for what is now about a $2.5 billion medical division of Henry Schein, which really we acted as, and continue to act as, a distributor and a solutions partner for medical device companies. And that's everybody from Medtronic down to the early stage company that's just initiating commercialization. We also set up something there called the Innovation Initiative, which was really my first taste into corporate venture investing. And I led that formation of the Innovation Initiative and led the first investment by Henry Schein into a minority equity stake into a telemedicine company. I then left Henry Schein to join a private equity firm based in New York, which was focused on control investments in healthcare companies. And then I joined Cleveland Clinic in 2021, first as a partner, and then I was elevated to the lead, the head of Cleveland Clinic Ventures in 2022. And I've been leading the team and building the team for the last couple of years now.
Excellent. And Henry Schein in Long Island, correct?
Correct.
So we're located in Smithtown, Long Island.
Awesome.
Former Long Islander.
Yeah, I used to live in Port Washington for a little over 20 years. So okay. Yeah, you can take the boy off the island, but you can't take the island out of the boy.
Well, you lost your New York accent, so that's good.
That's true. Although, if you ask people in Cleveland, they'll tell you I talk like a New Yorker.
Sounds good. So Cleveland Clinic Innovation and Ventures, you guys have a unique approach and value proposition when it comes to selecting and funding members of its MedTech and entrepreneurial group. And, we're very interested in specifically the innovation and venture arm. So what makes Cleveland Clinic stand out in how it approaches both ventures and innovation, and how does it differ from other hospital venture arms?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's probably a few structural elements that I would highlight that really differentiate Cleveland Clinic from many of our peer groups. Although we try to learn from our peers, and we often offer our perspective to provide our peer group members to learn from us as well. First of all, you've captured it pretty well in the way you've described it. Our venture effort is part of innovations, and I think that's really important. It wasn't always that way, but we find that the alignment between our overall innovation effort, which I'll explain in a moment, it's really critically important for the venture effort to be integrated as part of that overall innovation effort. So let me start by describing what is Cleveland Clinic Innovations. There are phrases that people might use to think about it. I've heard tech transfer, which I don't love, incubation, acceleration, venture studio. I've heard all of those things. It's kind of all of those things and more. And if you think about what Cleveland Clinic Innovations involvement in technology and innovation in healthcare is about, it's really starting with the idea that begins to germinate within the brain of a Cleveland Clinic employee. We call all of our employees caregivers, including someone like myself who's not patient facing. Once that caregiver starts to germinate that idea, the engagement team at Cleveland Clinic will actually work with that potential inventor to elucidate the invention and to describe the invention in a form called an invention disclosure form, an IDF, and that gets submitted to our office. So that sounds just like tech transfer. We have a team of teams, and Jeff Vince, who's my boss and the head of innovations, really reorganized our office a few years ago to really focus on those teams of teams. So we have 5 teams. We have that engagement team who works with the inventor. We have an assessment team that really focuses on evaluating the IDF. They'll do everything from evaluating market size, the competitive dynamic, reimbursement trends. Is there an opportunity to obtain unique and valuable patent position? Who's developing what? What do the eventual licensees or acquirers of this technology look like? And is it something that is supported as a potential advancement of this idea into a body of licensable intellectual property? If the assessment team supports it, we go through a series of processes to evaluate that, but that then gets handed off to our technology development team, and their whole job is to translate that idea into a body of licensable IP. So filing patents, developing prototypes, bench studies, advancing the solution to a point where an outside party might consider licensing the intellectual property. We have a business development and licensing team, and that's their job, is to find that licensing partner. And then simultaneous to the licensing team evaluating licensing partners, my team, the ventures team, we call them internally our new companies team, we will evaluate whether it makes sense to form a new company and negotiate an exclusive license between Cleveland Clinic and the company we just formed. And then for Cleveland Clinic to capitalize that company, ideally in tandem with bringing in outside capital to support that new company. And then we will serve as board members and help staff up the management team and support that company throughout its life cycle. So from initial, foundational capital all the way through late stage venture funding, Cleveland Clinic will maintain an active role in advising the company as members of the board, but also in supporting the company through our investments and our non-cash contributions to the business. And that's one of the things I think that really differentiates Cleveland Clinic, is really that cradle to grave or cradle to success pathway of an idea all the way through to a successful exit of a company. So that's one thing that really differentiates us. We really do drink our own Kool-Aid. We really nurture the best of our ideas and support them. And I think this might be disappointing for your audience to hear, but the majority of our companies that we support in our portfolio are in fact licensees of Cleveland Clinic intellectual property. Our primary focus today is to support the intellectual property, whether it becomes a license or whether it becomes a new company. We have on occasion made investments in outside companies, but I'd say historically that's been more the exception than the rule.
Mhm.
And I would say, the best chance a company has to receive an investment from Cleveland Clinic is by being a licensee of intellectual property, because not only are we supporting a company that we have identified as a great investment opportunity and a great strategic opportunity, but we're supporting intellectual property that was developed at Cleveland Clinic. The other factor, I guess I'll just mention, that does differentiate us a little bit. We are not a fund by any definition. We're investing directly off of Cleveland Clinic's balance sheet. When we make an equity investment by Cleveland Clinic, that's coming from our treasury or other captive cash that Cleveland Clinic has directly in that company. So we don't have like a fund. We don't even have an evergreen fund. So we are a balance sheet investor, I guess is the way to think about us.
Excellent. So when thinking about the types of groups, the companies, and specifically the technologies that you're looking for in Cleveland Clinic Innovation and Ventures, what do you consider for program acceptance and funding, specifically also from a technology standpoint? And do your organization or the individuals you accept range from physicians with a concept or an idea to early stage research groups to companies that are already funded or have robust funding and need to go the rest of the way? What's the breakdown of those groups?
So it's a great question. I think the answer probably is yes to all of the above. I think where it gets a little bit harder for us to make our initial investment in a company as the company approaches those later stages of funding. We don't have a defined ownership percentage that we have to own at exit. But I think philosophically, we'd like to own a material minority stake in a company at exit. So what does that mean? We want to own 15, 20, 25% of a company when they exit. We also would like the exit, what we consider a winner, to be a robust transaction price. So that 15 to 25% will result in a very material return back to Cleveland Clinic. So, a company that might sell for $25 million when they're successful, that's probably just not going to be a large enough exit for Cleveland Clinic to be meaningful from an equity investment standpoint. That doesn't mean that we don't develop IP that might become a $25 million solution to a market. Mm-hmm. And if Medtronic licenses that, we get royalties every year of that $25 million annually, we're okay with that. But we're not going to necessarily put $5 or $10 million into a company with a potential $25 million exit. The numbers just don't work. On the flip side, and I get this all the time, someone will approach us and say, hey, Cleveland Clinic, here's an area that you guys should care about. We're raising a Series D, $80 million financing. We'd love it if Cleveland Clinic could write a $20 million check. And oh, by the way, the pre-money valuation is $300 million. And just for us to write that large a check to own that smaller percentage of the company at that stage, the company has clearly left the harbor in which we would possibly invest long before we really had the opportunity. So either we're investing at startup or investing at a relatively early stage, like a seed or an A stage, as an initial investment. We want to have the opportunity to continue to invest across the life cycle of that investment. So just from a stage standpoint, that's kind of how I would frame it. The other metric I would think about is, where are we investing from a domain and from a disease state or from a focus area? And so I spend most of my time on the medical device part of our portfolio, which is about half of our companies in our portfolio are MedTech. We have 3 power alleys that I really focus on. Doesn't mean we won't invest in other parts of MedTech, but the 3 areas where I'd say there's concentration and focus are the first area is structural heart. Kind of makes sense because Cleveland Clinic, I think if people know about Cleveland Clinic, they know us as the number 1 heart hospital for, I think, the last 30 straight years. So we have a lot of clinical and research expertise that really can bring to bear some of the great innovations and advancements that are happening in cardiovascular medicine. The second area where we're very active is neuromodulation and neurostimulation. Again, similarly, our Neurological Institute is one of the top neurology institutes in the world. And then the third area really covers a few, I'll say domains or a few disease states. I don't have a better name for it. We call it surgical visualization and navigation. So how can we bring cutting edge technologies into the OR or into the cath lab to provide better information to the clinician while they're performing a procedure to help them make better decisions, which will result in better outcomes for the patient.
So like surgical navigation or maybe augmented reality, surgical
Correct.
applications, or others. Okay.
That's right. So we do have an AR company. We have a company that's developed really compelling ultrasound-based guidance, like high fidelity ultrasound for to aid in robotic assisted surgery. And then we have a company that generates 3D real-time images in the cath lab. So you can, if you're an interventional cardiologist, you can actually, make a very tortuous turn and know exactly where your catheter is, where the catheter tip is in real time. So it significantly reduces the time for procedures. It also reduces the exposure by the patient and, more importantly, the clinician to fluoroscopy, which is an effective visualization tool. But it's absolutely a case where too much fluoroscopy can be a bad thing.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was very thorough. So, would you mind outlining for our listeners the core values, the culture, the principles, and the goals that Cleveland Clinic Innovation Ventures Group focus on, not only from the equity standpoint, technology or application, but general healthcare and generating end results that propel healthcare forward for individuals, whether it's digital therapeutics or surgical or others?
Yeah, great. Another great question. So I'm proud of the fact that there are 6 core principles at Cleveland Clinic, one of which is innovations. And so the innovation team really embodies that guiding principle that is defined as foundational at Cleveland Clinic. And so, when we get training and questionnaires internally and we talk about innovation, that's when I rub my hands together and get really excited, because that's what we do every single day. And I have the privilege of working with some of the most capable and smartest leaders in their respective fields across Cleveland Clinic. So I have the benefit of working with, frankly, some great people, intelligent people, but also just really nice, caring, good people who ultimately we are in this, and our clinicians are in this, and our researchers are in this to improve care for all patients. And so I think that kind of gets to the core of your question. So we are an investor. Like any investor, our expectations are that we are going to put risk capital into companies with the ultimate objective of getting a attractive risk-adjusted return on our investment. So we absolutely have that as a core principle. Our investment committee and our leadership expects that we are going to generate attractive returns on our investment. But it doesn't start there, and I don't even think it ends there. That's sort of the table stakes. If you sort of build on top of that, the fact that we are focused, not exclusively, but we are focused on supporting the commercialization of intellectual property that starts at Cleveland Clinic by supporting companies that will eventually lead to commercialization pathways for our intellectual property. Cleveland Clinic will then enjoy any license fees and any royalties that result from those licenses related to the intellectual property. And an additional feature I didn't mention previously, but I think it's really important. What's in it for the inventor is that the inventor does get economic participation in any license-related economics. So if we get a license fee, the inventor shares in the economic participation of that license fee. If we get royalties over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the inventor will share in those royalties as well. So it's a very powerful way for an inventor, for a clinician or a researcher, or even a line employee at Cleveland Clinic. You don't have to have a PhD or an MD at the end of your name to submit an idea to Cleveland Clinic Innovations. If that innovation results in a license, you, the inventor, get economic participation. So you get the pride of knowing that you invented something that changed the lives of patients. You get economic reward that's commensurate with the value that you helped create as the inventor. And it becomes an incredibly powerful retention tool and recruitment tool for top clinicians, researchers, and caregivers in the medical field to come to Cleveland Clinic for all the other reasons that people should want to come to Cleveland Clinic, because it's one of the top institutions in the world in healthcare. But you're able to spend time doing things like innovation and then reap the rewards economically and otherwise from participating in those innovations. And then the last piece that maybe is the most important, I think this is what your question was getting to, is we can, if we are able to drive those innovations forward, we are changing lives. We are improving care. We're making procedures easier and more accessible and more successful with the innovation that we're supporting to improve care. I love something that our CEO said earlier this year. He said, healthcare is one of those industries where you're never going to get to a point where technology advances or procedure techniques advance, where we finally get to the point where we say, okay, we did it. We're the best we can ever be. Healthcare is an industry where there's always room for improvement. We are continually looking for ways to improve and enhance our methods and our methodologies. And that's what innovation is all about.
And you guys have been doing it for a century, with regards to clinicians and researchers and, baking that as part of your culture and ultimately really improving medicine, improving patient experiences, improving outcome. It's just in doing some preliminary research in your group, it's part and partial to what you guys are about. And speaking of that, you're plugged into a hospital system. So can you speak to the deep bench of clinical champions and departments within your organization, being that, if you have urology or cardiology technology, you're able to get the voice of the customer, you're able to do clinical trials. It's woven into the fabric of moving that ball forward relative to the device or systems that are being developed.
As I mentioned before, I've only been at Cleveland Clinic since 2021, but one of the things that has really impressed me in my 3.5 years at Cleveland Clinic is almost every single clinician, researcher, nurse, administrator that I've met at Cleveland Clinic is willing to become engaged and look at outside technology. There's an intellectual curiosity that really surprised me. I definitely expected to work with intelligent, capable people at Cleveland Clinic. What is surprised is their willingness to create time in their schedules, their very busy schedules, to look at innovation and technology, whether it is internally derived or externally derived. As I mentioned, there's an intellectual curiosity. I think there's a desire for Cleveland Clinic to understand what's happening in the world around us and to weigh in on whether a particular technique or technology is likely to be successful or not, and why, or what are the gaps in terms of adoption of a particular technology that looks promising. So the other piece I was just going to add that's kind of corollary to that is, as often as not, a company will reach out to us and then they'll either mention to us or we'll discover that one of our clinicians or researchers is already working with the company. And so, my advice to your listeners, if they're entrepreneurs and they're looking for ways to work with Cleveland Clinic, you can start with me and my group, and you can start with innovation. It might be just as powerful to try to get a connection to the relevant clinician or researcher in the field that you're developing or commercializing a solution in. The best thing you can do is call me up and say, JD, we're raising our Series A, and we're already working with Dr. So-and-so, and she loves our solution. She'd like to talk to you. You should reach out to her and mention our product, and get educated on why your subject matter expert is super excited about what we're doing, and that might, alter your perspective on whether we would consider an investment in the company. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, just a clinician being excited about it probably isn't enough, but it's a great start. If there's an opportunity for us to either pair intellectual property that we already have in our portfolio to that company, if there's an opportunity for that company to license IP from us, and that IP can be a patent, but it can also be know-how. If they're working closely, let's say, with one of our researchers or clinicians, and they want that researcher to contribute to the advancement of the intellectual property, there may be a way for us to put some kind of a license agreement in place that captures the contributions and the value of that Cleveland Clinic caregiver to reflect some economic value that could provide Cleveland Clinic and that caregiver with remuneration for their contributions as well.
Excellent. So let's talk about de-risking. So in any MedTech venture, there's technologies and really understanding the risk profile relative to the investment, the development road, the regulatory paths, and others, right? And it's critical to understand risk profiles. And as an organization, medical product development organization, we're hired by both MedTech clients to help develop devices and systems from concept to commercialization, but we're also hired by different groups who are funding MedTech groups in order to identify risk and identify and look at the risk profile and understand, what is the investment path. So does your group ever look for or incorporate outside validation from other strategic groups or traditional investors to either define that risk profile very accurately, which all ventures need to do, or share that financial burden relative to de-risking the program?
I, so I would start with the fact that if we are supporting intellectual property that starts at Cleveland Clinic, we sort of have that risk exposure from the get-go. We own, let's say we get assigned intellectual property, we get assigned a patent in the field of, mitral repair, mitral valve repair, using, let's say, and there's something specific company in our portfolio, minimally invasive transcatheter approach to a unique way of addressing mitral regurgitation. So we would want to, of course, independently validate that our approach is unique, that our approach is validated and valuable. And so we'll do everything from that assessment team, but just evaluating what else is out there, who's doing what, and what does the IP landscape look like, all the way to early validation studies, which might include bench testing and preclinical testing to confirm that the approach that we're using could work in humans. In the case of the mitral regurgitation solution, we've actually done some human cases as well. We've been able to validate in human cases that it in fact is working as intended. We do a lot at Cleveland Clinic. We can't do everything. So we oftentimes will work with outside vendors. Although I wouldn't think of them as vendors per se, they're really partners to us in advancing some of our solutions and then identifying critical factors that we do want to de-risk as we advance the solution. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would answer your question two ways. One, we probably have a greater risk appetite than typical investor because, again, if we have exposure to the IP from its inception, we're already kind of invested in it. And then how do we find the quickest pathway, the most direct pathway to de-risking and commercializing the opportunity? But we also recognize there are certain critical functions that we don't possess at Cleveland Clinic. So we'll work closely with partners to help de-risk those opportunities to the point where as early as possible, we do want to bring in outside investors, whether they're strategic investors or traditional venture investors, to invest alongside us to support some of the most exciting solutions that we're developing.
Yeah, and I believe just being part of a hospital system that you have experts on tap relative to reimbursement, relative to the actual physicians, and understanding the minutia of whatever the procedure needs to accomplish, and that can also help paint a picture relative to risk or technical risk, or even understanding the process or current processes and how it resolves certain issues. So that's excellent. So
you're 100% right. But the only issue I want to just point out there, and I forgot to mention this a moment ago, we want to validate our perspective. Mm-hmm. So we may have a certain point of view. It might be 100% right because we're Cleveland Clinic, we're a leader in the healthcare field, but it also may be that we're looking at a situation where there's an N of one. And what I mean by that is the Cleveland Clinic perspective may be the only perspective where that particular viewpoint exists. And when you go to other hospitals, they may have, or other modes of care, they may have a very different perspective. So it's important for us to validate our assumptions and our perspectives with external guidance as well. Absolutely. And sometimes those views get modified based on what we learn by talking to other parties and bringing in outside experts.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So at what point in the Cleveland Clinic and the MedTech startup relationship do you release them into the wild and spin them out?
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say if it was up to me, as early as possible. I think once we have confirmation and validation that we really have something, so releasing, maybe there's two ways I would answer the question. Releasing the technology into the wild is something we might consider as we're thinking about whether we should start a company around the IP or whether we should explore a license partnership with an outside party. So we may approach strategics, for example, simultaneous to us doing the work to evaluate whether we should start a company as an exclusive licensee of the intellectual property. And I think in a perfect world, we can compare the best alternative to license out the intellectual property and the risk and the reward associated with that, and then compare that to the risk and the reward associated with forming a new company and then licensing that intellectual property exclusively to the company we just formed. I'm trying to hold ourselves to that discipline of understanding, what our competitive alternative to starting a company is. Probably goes back to my banking days when a company would come to me and say, well, should we sell JD or should we raise money? And my answer to that usually was yes. Like, go do both, figure out what your best equity alternative is, and then compare that to the best alternative to potentially sell the company. And then you can make an informed decision about what your competitive alternatives are. And then you can make a decision about the risk and the return that you're prepared to accept at this point. So I think we want to go down that same path when we think about starting companies. But we want to put those companies, once we start them, we want to put them through the same paces every time there's a material decision to be made. So we may go through a very protracted diligence process and internal validation and evaluation to confirm the formation of a company. And then if a year and a half later, we're raising the Series A, we're going to put that company through exactly the same paces and reconfirm what we believed to be the case when we formed the company. Because circumstances may have changed, the market environment might have changed, the technology may have changed as well. The company might have had to take a right turn with respect to technology, and we want to make sure that our assumptions that we made when we started the company are still valid to the extent the assumptions have changed. How does that affect our perception of de-risking and the appropriate pathway to success for the company?
And that's just listening to you. That's, I believe, part of your, correct me if I'm wrong, part of your competitive differentiation is that we shouldn't classify Cleveland Clinic Ventures as a typical corporate venture capital firm, since you don't just invest and sell. You may fully acquire the technology or others, or spin them out or license. So that
well, let me just correct you there that it's unlikely we would just straight up acquire the technology. Because remember, we start with 100% ownership if we form a company by ourselves. I like to say, I don't know if this is universally true, but at the end of the company's road, we want to own 0% of the company, because we want the company to be successful and we want the company to have either gone public or gotten acquired by a strategic player in the space. But if the technology achieves commercial success, we get a return on our investment, and we've been able to enhance care, the quality of care outcomes in the patient, then that's mission accomplished as far as we're concerned.
Excellent. And JD, thank you for being here with us. It's been incredibly insightful, and both myself and the MIDI Vault listeners greatly appreciate your time and the outstanding work that you and the Cleveland Clinic Innovation and Ventures Group do. Thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of MIDI's Innovation Vault podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like, follow, and connect with us on social media to stay updated and gain more valuable insights into the MedTech industry. Find us on LinkedIn, MIDI Product Development, and join us as we continue exploring the innovation shaping healthcare's future. Thanks for listening.